This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, August 18th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in South Africa, where Embattled state arms manufacturer Denel has appointed Talib Sadik, who currently serves on its board of directors, as interim chief executive. Emma McCarthy has more of the details.
South Africa's embattled state arms manufacturer Denel has appointed Talib Sadik as its interim chief executive, the company said on Monday. Sadik's appointment comes after Dani du resigned as CEO after less than 2 years in the job after Denel struggled to pay staff due to a liquidity crisis worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. Du has not given a reason for resigning, but in a recent interview he told Reuters the company may not survive the next few months unless the government lets it use some promised bailout funds to generate revenues rather than repay debt. Denel, which makes equipment ranging from armoured vehicles to missiles, is embroiled in a dispute with labour unions over outstanding salaries and statutory obligations, such as paying into its employee pension fund. Sadik worked as Denel chief executive between 2008 and 2012. The recruitment process for a permanent CEO is currently underway.
Reuters' Emma McCarthy with that report. South Africa, with the continent's highest burden of COVID-19, has reached the peak of the pandemic, according to the president and top health officials. President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced a loosening of restrictions, but noted that he is not yet breathing a sigh of relief. VOA's Anita Powell reports from Johannesburg on how the nation reached this milestone.
A ray of hope for the Rainbow Nation, as the president announced that South Africa, with the continent's heaviest known burden of the virus, has passed its viral peak.
A ray of light is visible now on the horizon. Let us continue to exercise the greatest caution and care and remain ever vigilant. Let us continue to stand united in our determination to defeat this virus.
On the streets of Johannesburg Monday, residents reacted to the president's Saturday night announcement.
I feel as though it's lagging on too long. You know, the rest of the economy needs to get back into the swing of things.
We'll see how it goes. I have faith. I hope people have learned and will change, and they'll wear face masks.
The chair of South Africa's advisory committee on COVID-19 credits the government's swift lockdown measures. He says closing schools and banning international travel and sales of alcohol and tobacco were key.
In the period where we are now just past the peak of the epidemic, we've been seeing a slowing down in the number of cases, so that we are now between 4,000 and 5,000 cases a day.
Ramaphosa also announced a loosening of restrictions, including allowing sales of tobacco and alcohol.
And guided by the advice of our health experts, the Medical Advisory Committee, and after consultation with provincial and local government, Cabinet has decided to place the entire country on alert level 2, with effect from midnight on Monday, the 17th of August 2020.
South Africa has nearly 600,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the nation of nearly 60 million. It is also at the forefront of coronavirus prevention, with scientists at the University of the Witwatersrand this week launching the nation's second vaccine trial.
South Africa was able to build its capacity to undertake testing because of its TB and HIV epidemics. It's the same technology. The problem has been in South Africa that we can't buy enough test kits, because we are trying to buy the same test kits everyone else is trying to buy. And so we were constrained for a substantial period in just not being able to get enough kits. As that problem has been solved, now we do have enough kits. We have been able to escalate our testing to around 40 to 50,000 tests per day.
COVID-19 peak may have passed, says Karim, but the danger of a second surge remains. To that end, he urged South Africans to remain cautious. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
Local manufacturers of Ghana's iconic fabrics are under increasing pressure as counterfeits made in China are undercutting their production. The COVID-19 pandemic is adding more woes to this industry, where restrictions are slashing sales for the few remaining factories. Stacey Knott reports from Accra.
Ghana has a rich history of textile production, with different fabrics from woven kente to batik to wax prints, where designs carry meanings and consumers will buy new fabrics to mark occasions like funerals. However, counterfeits have severely impacted producers like Esther Amate. About 15 years ago, she started seeing counterfeit batik in Ghana with lower prices driven by consumer demand. While she makes the batik fabric she sells in her shop and markets in Ghana, she also sells locally made and counterfeit wax prints. But now, COVID-19 has underscored the importance of supporting local industries, so she has vowed to resist the customer demand and stop selling Chinese imports.
When people started demanding what they wanted, then I said, okay, I'm a businesswoman, so I have to go in that way too. But now I want to stop. Now we need a lot of support so that we can stop and do our own thing, because we can do very nice fabrics.
Amate says there needs to be a bigger focus on supporting Ghana-made fabrics. Textile company GTP has designed and printed fabrics in Ghana since 1966. Their designs are often stolen, printed in China and other Asian nations, and then smuggled back into Ghana, severely undercutting the business. It is also very hard to tell the real fabrics from the fakes.
It's highly, highly frustrating, very frustrating, and sometimes it's really worrying, not just for us, but also for the country, because I can tell you, the African print market is it's a very huge market, but unfortunately for us, our government do not get the necessary revenues that it's supposed to get because of the huge amount of smuggling.
COVID-19 compounded these issues. During the recent lockdown in Ghana, sales dropped from about 1 million yards a month to less than 100,000. However, the Dutch-owned GTP remains hopeful and even brought out new designs inspired by Ghana's handling of the pandemic. GTP's Stephen Kofi Badu says he will not be surprised if these are soon counterfeited. GTP does have measures in place to protect its products. In 2015, it started working with Ghanaian social enterprise Pedigree, which uses technology to help buyers know what they purchase is authentic. The fabrics have a scratch code on them, which buyers text to a number to get confirmation the fabric is from GTP.
The revolutionary aspect about the technology is how it arms not the regulatory systems per se or the government alone, but more importantly consumers. Makes consumers the vanguards against fake, counterfeit or spurious products, in this case textiles.
For the past few years, Ghana's government has been working on measures to regulate the industry and curb illegal imports, such as creating a stamp for fabrics produced in Ghana and a task force to look for counterfeit goods. GTP's Badu hopes the legislation will be introduced next year. Stacey Knott for VOA News, Accra.
In our health report, stuttering, also known as stammering, and dysphemia is a speech disorder characterized by, among other things, repetition of sounds, syllables, or words, and interruptions in speech known as blocks. According to the American Stuttering Foundation, more than 70 million people worldwide stutter, about 1% of the population. Abena Asiedua Owusu Antwi is an expert with the organization Speech and Language Therapy in Ghana. She tells us more about the condition that experts say affect more males than females.
Stuttering is a speech disorder But this disorder is characterized by disruptions in speech. So normally when someone stutters, you see that the person prolongs, or the person repeats, or there are blocks in the person's speech.
What causes stuttering?
So there's a lot of research that's being done to really know the cause of stuttering. But we've been made to understand that there's a genetic link related to stuttering. So let's say if you have a family where maybe grandpa used to stammer, or grandma did stammer, or does stammer, there's a probability that the child or whoever is in the family may end up stammering too. Stuttering really begins in childhood. So we say from the age of 2, that's when the child's language is starting to develop. So when the child, we take the age range from 2 to 5 years. So if the child's stammering persists beyond 5 years, there's a probability that the child is going to stutter into adulthood. So that's how come we realize that, okay, this child is going to stammer. And whenever parents notice that their children begin to stammer, the best thing they can do for the child is to seek help. So you can either make a report to your medical doctor, or you see a speech and language therapist. So the early they intervene, the early they can advise you better as to what to do with your child, and as to how to help you curb all the things that could help your child communicate.
What type of treatment are available for that?
So with the treatment, when you see a speech and language therapist, the speech and language therapist assesses you, or assesses the child we are talking about. And when that happens, the treatments are individualized to the needs pertaining to the client. And I believe greatly that the best treatment you can get is, they are in two folds. That you, the individual, accepting that you stammer. And the second treatment we can give to the individual who stammers is being able to accommodate the people who stammer.
How so?
Because many a times, people who stammer, they are normally stigmatized, they are labeled. We don't really pay attention to the content. We just listen to how they are going to say it. And before they voice out whatever they want to say, it's either we are going to call them names, or we are going to mock them, or we are just going to label them and just finish up their sentences for them. Because if we are able to accommodate them and realize that, okay, this is maybe the difficulty the person is presenting with, what can I do to help him? Then I accommodate him and say, okay, I wouldn't have to fill up his sentences for him. I'll have to wait and then let him finish whatever he has to say, give him the room to be able to flow with whatever he has to say.
Are there some exercises that people who stutter can do on their own?
So with people who stutter, what we generally tell them is that you have to allow yourself time to plan and then to produce your speech. Do not just relax and do it at a slow rate. Allow more pausing whenever you are talking. Try to be easy with your speaking. So there's nothing wrong if you let people know that you do stammer. So when you bring it up front that, okay, hi, I'm Abna, and I'm going to make a presentation on stammering, but I stammer. So you've made it clear to them that, so at this point in time, if I have prolongations, if I do repeat, if I have blocks, I need you to be able to accommodate the fact that this is what I present with. And with regards to the treatment, yes, I do know there are assistive devices, but in our end of the world, in Ghana, we are not really using most of these devices yet.
Talk to us about how challenging or type of progress you've seen in addressing stuttering.
I think the greatest challenge we are facing now is the lack of knowledge people have about stammering. We still dwell on things where we believe in myths. We'll declare the child as a river child. We'll declare it as a curse. That's the kind of perception we have. But gradually, we are getting there. It's where we have the Ghana Stammering Association, where they are doing a very good job with educating the public, educating people who stammer, and trying to get on board people to be able to support all of these people in order for them to be able to communicate effectively wherever they find themselves.
Experts say men are 4 times more likely to be affected by stuttering than women. About 5% of all children go through a period of stuttering that lasts 6 months or more. 3/4 of those will recover by late childhood. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, the history of women's suffrage movement and women's equality today. We'll be right back.
Presidential nominating conventions do not date all the way back to the early days of the United States. Back then, political parties held caucuses where small groups of party leaders chose candidates. It wasn't until the 12th presidential election in 1832 that parties held conventions to select their candidates. There were occasional surprises over the candidates selected at conventions. Some conventions took a long time to name a nominee. In 1924, the Democrats spent 16 days to take 109 votes to nominate John Davis, who wound up losing the election to Republican Calvin Coolidge. Modern conventions move quicker than that. Most of the delegates are awarded to candidates through state caucuses or primaries, and the nominee is known before the convention begins. Conventions still deliver an occasional surprise. Nominees often name their pick for vice president at a convention. Because they are televised, they attract the attention of voters trying to decide how to vote in November. The COVID pandemic has forced both parties to change plans for 2020, relying more on virtual settings without large crowds of faithful party in attendance.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Democrats appealed for party unity Monday as they reached out to voters across the United States in the first night of a virtual convention that will name their nominee for the November election. Former Vice President Joe Biden and running mate Kamala Harris, a senator from California, will get the party's nod later this week. And as Michael Sullivan reports, the televised event is intended to generate excitement as the election campaign enters its final phase.
An unprecedented event for extraordinary times, a social media gathering and television gala hosted by Hollywood star Eva Longoria Baston. There were reminders of the racial tensions that have divided the nation, from the mayor of Washington, D.C., among others.
It was here that just weeks ago, Americans donned face masks and safely and peacefully protested the death of George Floyd.
There were the usual trappings of a convention, but the audience was remote, and most testimonials were pre-recorded, including one from former First Lady Michelle Obama.
I know Joe. He is a profoundly decent man, guided by faith. He was a terrific vice president. He knows what it takes to rescue an economy, beat back a pandemic, and lead our country.
Crucial for Democrats who hope to oust the incumbent, support from progressives who rallied in the campaign around Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
We're facing the worst public health crisis in 100 years and the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. We are confronting systemic racism and the enormous threat to our planet of climate change. And in the midst of all of this, we have a president who is not only incapable of addressing these crises, but is leading us down the path of authoritarianism.
Also important, support from moderate Republicans and independent voters. Former Ohio Governor John Kasich is backing Biden.
I'm a lifelong Republican, but that attachment holds second place to my responsibility to my country. That's why I've chosen to appear at this convention.
Less than 3 months before the election, the challenge for both parties, creating excitement for the candidates during a pandemic. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
The Democratic National Convention this year is entirely virtual, with speakers beamed in from locations around the country. But one small city that rarely gets national media attention is in the spotlight. presumptive presidential nominee Joe Biden's hometown. Isha Sarai reports from Wilmington, Delaware, on how residents are anticipating all of the attention.
Delaware, known as the first state as it was the first to ratify the U.S. Constitution, boasts a population of just under 1 million. But many residents say they are excited to be in the spotlight as presumptive presidential nominee Joe Biden returns to his hometown for the virtual convention.
Delaware is the spot, not the hot spot for the pandemic, but the hot spot for Biden and Harris 2020. We're ready.
I'm tired of people thinking that we are the small wonder, and they're like, does anybody live in Delaware? Yes, a lot of educated, hard-working people are in Delaware, and we're not just like, we're the first state.
Many Delaware residents were excited to see the former vice president back in his hometown, noting their claim to fame.
It was very exciting to have the local guy. I used to bump into Joe Biden in the train station when he was a senator and see him all the time, and he's always around town, and he was very good friends with my cousin.
But Delaware residents remember this energy from 2008 when Barack Obama first picked Joe Biden as his running mate.
We are over the moon because it brings back to a time that President Obama and Vice President Biden were actually, making their trek the first time around and stopping here in Delaware, and now to have, soon to be, hopefully, President Biden back in the state is so thrilling.
But with convention events happening online all week, Delaware residents will likely be watching speeches from their living rooms like the rest of the country. Isha Sarai, VOA News, Wilmington, Delaware.
No more rallies. Handshakes are now passed, and selfie lines lasted just one election cycle. Those are just some of the visible changes in American politics thanks to coronavirus. But COVID-19 is causing some more subtle changes that will impact the 2020 election and beyond. VOA Steve Radish reports.
Staples of the American political landscape are now threatened by the coronavirus pandemic, like voting in person, raucous political rallies, and celebratory conventions.
There's a real debate about whether conventions matter.
People will miss the camaraderie, the collegiality, getting together with people they don't see very often on a convention floor. But I'm just not sure how much that counts for the actual activity of an election campaign.
Karlyn Bowman analyzes public opinion at the American Enterprise Institute. Although most Americans still want to vote in person, she says they also want to have the option to vote by mail. Primary elections held during the pandemic saw some states able to count absentee mail-in ballots promptly while keeping polling places open and moving. Other states experienced embarrassing delays tabulating and validating votes.
I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people, the requirement to do this happened suddenly. There wasn't a lot of long-term planning to say, hey, what happens if we have a pandemic and everyone is trapped in their house? It's just not something people were thinking about. But now they have to do it quickly, and if they're going to be effective, they have to do it right on the first try.
President Donald Trump has seized on scattered and rare instances of fraud in voting by mail, saying it should not be expanded.
I think what he spurred is that Democratic voters seem much more likely to want to vote by mail than Republican voters. And, that does set up some perverse incentives for Republicans.
Kyle Kondik analyzes elections for Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics. He says Americans will miss a basic element of campaigning this year.
So much of being a politician is it's sort of a tactile profession, in that you're shaking hands, giving people hugs, interacting closely with people. I think Joe Biden, sometimes to his detriment, he's sometimes been accused of being a little too touchy-feely, basically, in his interactions with people. But he's known as being kind of a warm person and someone who gets up close to people, and you just can't do that.
Clearly, the Trump campaign appears to be concentrating still on in-person contacts. We've certainly seen the Biden campaign being much more of the basement mentality, working very heavily digitally, and it remains needs to be seen what works. I mean, I'm not so sure I would open a door to a stranger at this point.
A tiny virus has transformed the 2020 campaign, changing politics as we knew it. Steve Reddish, VOA News, Washington.
100 years ago in August, U.S. women were granted the right to vote through the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. The amendment was introduced in Congress in 1878 and took more than 40 years to be passed and ratified by 75% of the states. VOA's Deborah Block looks at the history of the women's suffrage movement and women's equality today.
Feminists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries championed women's suffrage in the United States during a long and difficult struggle.
There's a lot of ridicule and scorn that's leveled at these women.
The fight for suffrage began in 1848 at the first Women's Rights Convention held in a church in Seneca Falls, New York. Delegates at the convention crafted a document that called for equality with men, including the right to vote.
They said all men and women are created equal. They borrowed from the Declaration of Independence, but they made that very significant change, adding "and women."
As women fought for suffrage for more than 70 years, Black women were not welcomed into the movement by whites.
But in their own organizations, anti-slavery societies, church conferences, civil rights organizations, and more, African American women over the course of 2 centuries developed their own women's movement.
As the roles of women were changing in the early 20th century, a new generation of women continued the struggle. They stepped up their protests, organizing parades, silent vigils, and hunger strikes.
They go out into crowds of men at factory gates at lunchtime and stand on little stools, and they give what are called stump speeches. They give speeches for women's suffrage in public to rowdy male audiences.
After President Woodrow Wilson changed his stance to support the amendment in 1918, it was ratified 2 years later. A century later, however, many women faced voter suppression, especially those who are Black.
Disproportionately face voter ID requirements. They face polling places that are shuttered. They are purged disproportionately from the rolls.
Inequalities like these may be resolved through the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, proponents say, which was first introduced by suffragists in 1923.
You cannot discriminate on the basis of sex, and this would apply to the federal government and all of its policies and to the 50 states.
The future of the ERA is uncertain, but like the women who fought to vote, advocates say they will keep fighting for it. Deborah Block, VOA News, Washington.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.